In tonight's rewrite, police reporting. Good police reporters know when they're being used by the police. Bad police reporters also know when they're being used by the police, but they eagerly report whatever the police want them to report. Police reporting used to be a standard beat on American newspapers, but nothing is standard on American newspapers anymore as the death rattle of that industry gets louder and louder, and the budget cuts for reporting become more severe, and newspapers desperately cling to readership by expanding their coverage of celebrities and food. The New York Times today has six full pages devoted to food, everything you need to know about slow-cooked brisket, cooking sticks, and flatbreads. Nothing that has happened in Ferguson, Missouri can compete with food for coverage in the Times, which devoted about a page and a half to Ferguson today. That space was split between two stories, one which was essentially a profile of Attorney General Eric Holder, just pegged to his trip to Ferguson today, and the other is a terribly misleading, badly crafted story about witnesses to the killing of Michael Brown. That story does not include a single reference to the person who, by all public accounts so far, remains the star witness in this case. A better witness might emerge, but that hasn't happened yet. That star witness, Tiffany Mitchell, told her story on this program.
As I come around the corner, I hear tires squeaking, and as I get closer, I see Michael and the officer wrestling through the window. Michael was pushing, trying to get away from the officer, and the officer was trying to pull him in. As I see this, I pull out my phone because it just didn't look right. You never just see an officer and someone just wrestling through the window. So as I pull out my phone, the first shot was fired through the window, and I just try to get out the way. I pull onto the parking lot right beside where the cop car was, and that's when Michael kind of broke away and started running down the street. The officer gets out of his vehicle and he pursues him. As he's following him, he's shooting at him, and Michael's body jerks as if he was hit, and then he turns around and he put his hands up, and the officer continued to walk up on him and shoot him until he goes all the way down to the ground.
If you settled into your chair this morning to read the Times account of what witnesses have said, you would not have read one word of what you just heard, nor would you have read of the existence of Tiffany Mitchell. The first sentence of the Times story says, quote, "Witnesses have given investigators sharply conflicting accounts of the killing." The Times then goes on to present witness accounts that do not sharply conflict. The Times simply asserts in the first sentence that the accounts sharply conflict and then fails to demonstrate that. But that sentence is exactly what the police defenders of Officer Darren Wilson wanted the Times to print. That's what they need to get out there. Just the belief that there are conflicting accounts by witnesses of the killing, and that there is someone out there who is in conflict with Tiffany Mitchell's testimony. The Times makes it very plain that the idea of conflicting witnesses comes from law enforcement sources. And in a profound and uncharacteristic flash of irresponsibility, the Times fails to produce a single witness who sharply conflicts with any other witness in the article. In the Times article, Freeman Bosley, the lawyer for Dorian Johnson, who was walking with Michael Brown, tells his client's story for him. Mr. Bosley says Dorian Johnson has been interviewed by the FBI in St. Louis County for nearly 4 hours. He says that Dorian Johnson admitted that he and Michael Brown had stolen cigarillos from the store before the shooting. The Times says this about how the action started on the street. Quote, "Contrary to what several witnesses have told law enforcement officials," Mr. Bosley said that the officer then reached out of the window with his left hand and grabbed Mr. Brown by the throat. The Times begins that by saying, contrary to what several witnesses have told law enforcement officials, but then the Times never tells you what those witnesses actually told the law enforcement officials. Where does the contrary come from? Do those witnesses disagree that the officer reached out of the window at all, or do they disagree that the officer grabbed Michael Brown by the throat? Do some of them say he grabbed Michael Brown by the shoulder near the throat, or by the arm, or do some of them say he didn't grab Michael Brown at all? We have no idea. We are not allowed to judge whether there is a sharp disagreement there. The Times reporters who worked on this story simply accepted what law enforcement told them, and they printed it. The Times reporters quote only two witnesses directly: Michael Brady, who has also been interviewed by CNN, and James McKnight. And not one word that those two witnesses say in the Times article sharply conflicts with each other or with anything Tiffany Mitchell said. In fact, nothing they say conflicts in any way, not sharply, not slightly, not in any way. Then there is the most egregious passage in the New York Times article. Officer Darren Wilson's lawyer could not have written it better. It begins with what Michael Brady says he saw. Quote, he said he did see a police officer get out of the patrol car and start walking briskly while firing on Mr. Brown as he fled. What happened next could be what the case turns on. What happened next? That could be what the case turns on. There's the New York Times dismissing the first shots that the officer fired after getting out of the car as Michael Brown fled. That doesn't matter in this New York Times account. Law enforcement sources that the Times reporters were working with tricked them into thinking that what happens after that, what happens next, is what the case turns on, not realizing that the shots fired while Michael Brown is fleeing, those shots, that is an illegal use of deadly force. That is a crime. The police officer had no legal right to shoot at Michael Brown while he was fleeing. The Times reporters don't know that. They think it's all about what happened next. And what happens next in the Times article is that the article gets much, much worse. Quote, what happened next could be what the case turns on. Several witnesses have told investigators that Mr. Brown stopped and turned around with his arms up. According to his account to the Ferguson police, Officer Wilson said that Mr. Brown had lowered his arms and moved toward him. Law enforcement officials said, fearing that the teenager was going to attack him, the officer decided to use deadly force. The Times doesn't seem to realize that the officer already decided to use deadly force when he fired the first shots. Then comes the single worst line in the New York Times article. Some witnesses have backed up that account. That's it. A simple declarative sentence. Some witnesses have backed up that account, and the New York Times does not produce or even refer to a single witness who backs up that account. Not one. It just takes a leak from the police and prints it as a fact, and it is used as a fact in the Times to back up a very vague police description of what happened. The Times says, quote, Officer Wilson said that Mr. Brown had lowered his arms and moved toward him, law enforcement officials said. What does that mean? What does move toward him mean? A half step while falling from the bullets that Officer Wilson has already fired into Michael Brown? Does it mean one full step? Does it mean two steps? The New York Times never tells you that. The New York Times doesn't know. Moved toward him is all the clarity that you get from the New York Times in-depth reporting on this. This on the point that the Times wrongly believes the case turns on. That's all you get on that point. The New York Times interviewed Michael Brady. Why didn't they quote him on how Michael Brown moved toward the officer? Listen to this description Michael Brady gave tonight about how Michael Brown moved toward the officer.
About time I gets outside, he's already turned around, facing the officer. He's balled up. He have his arms like under his stomach, and he was like halfway down, like he was going down. And the officer lets out about 3 or 4 shots at him. So like I said, just like the body, I took a few pictures in the video, but how his body is on the ground, just like with his arms tucked in. That's how he got shot or whatever. But like I said, before he went down, he was already like this, and he took like 1 or 2 steps going towards the officer, and he, like I said, let go about 3 or 4 more shots at him.
So that's what Michael Brady means by moving toward the officer. Michael Brown stumbling 2 steps forward as he's going down from the bullets that are already in his body, and as he continues to go down, the officer keeps firing. And as we know from preliminary autopsy results, one of the bullets that killed Michael Brown went through the top of his skull, an objective scientific finding that is completely consistent with what Michael Brady just described. The New York Times normally uses the best reporting standards of any news organization in the country. I have never seen the New York Times used by police this way. The New York Times is definitely going to have better days covering this story. I'm sure they will do more great work on this story, but they didn't do that today. Like I said, there are good police reporters and bad police reporters. And we could really use more good police reporters right now.